So, what personal perspective will I bring to Interfaith Conversations? Let's talk about it in this episode. Welcome to Interfaith Conversations. I'm Matthew McKnight, your host. Here at Interfaith Conversations, we connect with each other's faith and beliefs. Last episode, we talked about the idea of convicted civility, an idea coined by Martin Marty, a Lutheran scholar. And so in this light, I'd like to acknowledge that no one comes to interfaith conversations with 100% objectivity or independent from their own background or worldview that they hold themselves. And so while that's the case, I explain to you what myself and my faith will bring to these conversations that we have on this channel. I already shared a little bit about myself in the first episode, so if you want to get more of those type of details, you can go back to that one. But I thought I'd share a few more details here as well as it pertains to my experience with faith through my own life. Originally, I was going to do this episode in one large piece, but I decided to break it down into two sections. So this first part will be focused on my personal experiences with faith, and the second part will talk more about my particular perspective from my own faith tradition and what that brings to interfaith conversations. So it's probably obvious to those watching, but for the sake of those who are listening into the podcast, I am a middle-class, white, heterosexual male who is also married with my own biological children. So with that being said, it would be wrong for me to suggest somehow that I represent all members of my own faith. We have wonderful members in my faith who differ from me in all the social categories I just mentioned, each with their own lived experiences with faith. So I can't talk to what their experiences are in its entirety. I'd love to have some of them on eventually, have their perspectives discussed as well. But this is the kind of perspective that I bring. But while social categories that I shared above shape my worldview, everyone has their own lived experiences regardless of the categories that they have, including for myself. I have my own personal and family experiences that are unique to me. So to tell you a little bit about that, I come from a simple family, really, in terms of worldly status. Even though that might be the case, I feel like I come from a family tradition which is rich in terms of faith. Ever since I was about 16 years old, I have felt a close relationship with God and have always felt sensitive throughout my life to spiritual things in general. I was taught from an early age by my father that it was more important to do the right thing than to follow what everyone else was doing, even if that meant going against the decisions made by my peers in my own faith community. I have always appreciated this advice from my father throughout my life. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most would know us by the name Mormon. I was raised in the church and chose to be baptized at 8 years old. Throughout my life, I have served in many ways in the church, always striving to find ways to both honor God and be a better steward over ministering to those in need, whatever the capacity may be. For the sake of understanding a little bit about our faith, I am an ordained elder in the church. Our structure is a little bit different than it would be in other Christian traditions, however. We have what's called a lay clergy, which means all of our leadership positions in the local places where we live is all volunteer-based. No one's paid for the services that we provide. The local bishops in our church, the local presidents who are over multiple congregations, which we call stake presidents, which would be kind of similar to bishops in the Catholic faith in that sense. Those are all local clergy that are volunteer-based. In this priesthood role of an elder, I'm responsible to teach and minister to the spiritual and temporal needs of others, both people in and outside of my faith. But while I'm an ordained elder in the church, it's not used as a title for me. That's in our faith, that's reserved for those who are serving full-time in the church, which are people like the men missionaries that you see out and about that would have elder on their name badge, or the 12 apostles in our faith. Those are the people who would use that elder as a title. If you want to know what to call me, you can just use my name. I'm Matthew. For plenty of years, I have taught from our Sunday school curriculum, spoke in congregational services, and ministered in the pastoral care of our members and also people not of my faith that just need help in general. It's with these incredible people that I have laughed with, ate with, listened with, studied with, served with, and even cried with that have taught me about life's joys and challenges. They've inspired me, stretched me, and frankly, changed me. Again, these experiences don't make me somehow unique from my counterparts in my faith. These are experiences that are common across many members of our faith. But I share these things here at this point in the podcast just to give you more context behind where I'm coming from. I think it's important to also point out that this podcast is my own doing. I am not affiliated with this podcast with the church in any way. Any of the thoughts and views that I share are my own personal thoughts about my faith and don't reflect some general statement from the church. I think it's also important to point out that I'm not trying to make this podcast a Latter-day Saint apologetic or proselyting focused podcast. There are great things out there for those things. For those who want to seek them, they're there. The reason why I bring up these things about my faith is I think it's important for me to convey accurate views of my faith. And so that's one of the goals I'll bring to these conversations that I have on this channel and podcast. So what else does my personal perspective bring to interfaith conversations? Well, my wife would tell you that I love studying religions all the time because I think that's what she sees me doing a lot of our marriage. Really, I've always enjoyed learning about religion and spirituality throughout my life, including those that are not from my own. So I can share a few stories with you. When I was growing up in my church services, sometimes when you're sitting in the pews, you're not sure what to do as a little child, and so you're trying to keep yourself busy. And one of the things I would do is I'd open up the scriptures that we'd have, and there'd be different maps of places in the Middle East where a lot of the stories of the Bible come from. And so I remember just looking at those and just loving the opportunity to learn about these other places and wanting to get to know more about these places when I grew up. Another fun story when I was young, my uncle is from the country India. And so when I was growing up, we once went with them to a Hindu cultural event where they were doing a reenactment of some of the mythology in Hinduism. And just to see how the dance and all the other pieces were coming together, I thought that was very fascinating as probably an 10-year-old kid. So being exposed to those type of things as a kid was something that was really fun for me. I think the other person that I should definitely do a shout out to is my mom. My mother has been such a big influence in my life and in a lot of really positive ways when it comes to interfaith type of things. My mother taught us all sorts of stories growing up, made sure we knew about those stories. My mother was always very keen on helping us understand the problems associated with slavery in the American context. Slavery was a big issue in America for a long time, and through stories like To Kill a Mockingbird or others, my mom really highlighted the injustice and the issues regarding slavery in the U.S. and how, in many ways, this continues to perpetuate in different ways today as far as perceptions and prejudice that come just based on people's color, and how important it is to work past that and understand where people are coming from their perspectives. The other thing that my mother was very keen on making sure I understood was the tragedy and horror of issues with the Holocaust. The Holocaust was a big tragedy in a lot of ways for those living in Europe, and I'm grateful for my mother for helping me understand why that happened and what to ensure we don't do to other groups today that would lead to that type of genocide. Two other things I would highlight as far as influences in my life in my 20s was learning more about Mahatma Gandhi's story and also reading and watching about Malcolm X. Malcolm X is a fascinating and obviously divisive figure for a lot of people. Maybe controversial is another word for it. But one of the things I always loved about Malcolm X's story is that he went from someone who was quite extreme, even violent, and accepting violence as a means to achieve certain ends, and learning, especially after doing the Hajj as a Muslim, coming back to the U.S. and realizing that there are better ways to try and achieve social change than just violence. And he really toned down a lot of that towards the end of his life. And so stories like that really resonated with me, and I think really highlight a lot of meaning in how important it is to understand people of other faiths. As far as a few other things that kind of touched or affected me in interfaith ways, was when I started my professional career, I actually picked up a biography on the Buddha by Karen Armstrong. Those who don't know Karen Armstrong's work, Karen Armstrong has written a lot of books on religion, and anything I've picked up from her obviously can be a little bit more secular than, say, like a streamlined or a mainline faith perspective. But the biography was really cool. I really learned a great deal about Buddhism in here and a lot about just dharmic faiths in general and belief systems. And it really, simply put, was enlightening. It taught me what nibbana or nirvana is all about, and that it's growing up in the West. I was used to people doing yoga and things to try and calm their minds, but I really learned from this biography on Buddha about the idea of reaching nibbana or nirvana is a experience that is about letting go of oneself, but completely enwrapping yourself in compassion. And it was quite meaningful to me as a Latter-day Saint who's a follower of Jesus Christ to have this interesting distinctions between how would Buddhism talk about this idea of creating a compassionate world, and that is a state of being that is the focus to be obtained by someone in the Buddhist faith, and how that plays around with the whole idea of selfless love in Christianity. So I learned a lot there. It was very enlightening for me. I really valued what I got out of that book. Another one I read not long after that, actually, was the Bhagavad Gita, but according to Gandhi's commentary. It's quite thin. It's not very long. But what's interesting about this book is it has the lines from the Bhagavad Gita, and then it has, like, underneath those particular lines from the Gita, it has Gandhi's commentary on it. So you learn a lot about social action and kind of what he saw as kind of the impetus for the reasons why he acted in the ways he did when he was putting together the movements and building his communities wherever he was going. That was fascinating to kind of gain that perspective from Gandhi that way. Another big thing is I've studied the Quran, and as I've studied the Quran, I've been amazed at how obviously there are distinct differences between things in Islam and my faith, the biggest one notably being how we define Jesus's role in salvation and in history. But it's important, again, in interfaith ways, is where do you see the commonalities and work from there first. And so in reading the Quran, I've been fascinated by a lot of the things that I've read and how a lot of it rings true to me. One of the verses that I really like is in Surah 49, ayat 13, or that's just really chapter 49, verse 13. But it's this point. It says, "O humanity, indeed we created you from a male and a female and made you into peoples and tribes so that you may get to know one another." And I think the whole point of that statement, I think, is profound because, one, it's a reference to God creating diversity. It highlights that God had a purpose, or that the divine had a purpose in bringing all sorts of different cultures and people together in different ways, but that we may learn from each other's perspectives. So I love that. That's a really cool verse. Let me end with one more story. I think this kind of highlights my goal, even on the podcast, a little bit when I bring people on to interview them. So this story is actually interesting because it happened to me as a missionary in Australia, where I served for 2 years when I was young. But this is an interesting story because of kind of how it happens. So as a missionary, you spend a lot of time in the morning out, and then you come usually home for lunch, and then you go back out again. And one of the things that was interesting about it was one day as we were coming out of our flat, which is our apartment, coming up our walkway were 2 other missionaries, but they were from a different faith. They were from the Jehovah's Witness faith. And it was fascinating because here we are. What happens when you have two Latter-day Saint missionaries run into two Jehovah's Witness missionaries. It was funny because you could see the look on our faces. Everyone's eyes got big. But it was interesting. In that moment, I had two choices to make. I could have rooted myself in whatever category I was seeing in front of me, and other faith or belief, someone that's different from me, and talk about the differences in our faiths. But I chose not to do that. The other side of the coin was empathy. And I remember looking in their eyes and going, wow, they look just as surprised as we are. I should just get to know this person. So instead of even bringing up anything about the different perspectives or beliefs about our faiths, I just reached out. He was a young man like myself, and I just said, how you doing today? How's things going for you guys? What's things like for you? So what I tried to do is I reached out to the person, not what I saw as the category in front of me. And that's kind of my goal here in these interfaith conversations is, yes, I do bring my own perspective to the table. We all do. But how do I utilize that in a way to connect in positive ways with those that are different than me as far as belief and faith? And so I'm really excited to kind of dive into that kind of stuff with you guys. Interfaith work really is about empathy. It's about getting outside your own little fishbowl and realizing there's a whole world of experience beyond your own, and then allowing that to inform your own experience when you hop back into your fishbowl. And so over time, hopefully what happens is, I guess by way of analogy, your fishbowl becomes more porous. You end up having a more expansive view of existence and the human condition. So really, Interfaith combines my love of religion, my sincere desire to get to know others better, and my passion to build community. And so currently, since I'm based out of Utah, I will be working and talking with a lot of folks that are in the local area, in the Salt Lake City area and other places in Utah. But it's not just excluded to that. I'll be talking with people outside the state. These discussions are a global value. I'm hopeful that as we continue these conversations, you'll see things that you want to understand in your own faith, and what this means for yourself as you're moving forward, trying to make things happen in the world. I think that's the other thing that's really important to me with these conversations is, don't come here just to have an idea about another faith. Come here with an idea that you want to be inspired to then go act. Either to go interact with another interfaith community yourself, or to get out and serve. There's a lot of need in this world, and it's better to find ways to reach across, grab that hand, and work together. So stay tuned for part 2, where I talk about more generally what a Latter-day Saint perspective from the Church of Jesus Christ can bring to interfaith conversations. So until then, whether you say shalom, salam, or namaste, you can be the change the world needs today.